She was standing behind the barn in the gray light of a dying afternoon, and she was crying like a woman who had been holding it in for years. I had come around the corner to fetch a coil of rope, and instead I found her, Clara Whitfield, wife of the man who signed my wages, with her hands pressed flat against the weathered wood, her shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that doesn't make a sound. She heard my boots in the dirt and turned, and for one long moment we just looked at each other. Her eyes were red, her cheeks wet, and the wind off the prairie lifted the loose strands of her dark hair across her face. Then she said it. She said it plainly, the way a woman says something she has rehearsed alone in the dark of too many sleepless nights. "I want you to be my lover, Caleb." I stood there with the rope in my hand, and the whole sky behind me turning the color of a bruise, and I knew right then that every road I'd ever ridden, every ranch I'd ever worked, every dry sunrise I'd ever watched alone on the plains, had been leading me to this moment, to this woman, to a choice that had no good answer and no clean way out. My name is Caleb Walker. I was 31 that autumn, a drifter by habit rather than misfortune. Ranches from the Texas Panhandle through Colorado and into Wyoming territory, always moving on before anything could take root. A man without ties doesn't leave much behind when he rides out, and he doesn't carry much with him either. Just his horse, his bedroll, and whatever he'd learned about the land and people and himself in years under the open sky. On I'd come to the Whitfield homestead in September, when the aspen on the ridge were turning gold. A foreman in Laramie had pointed me here. Thomas Whitfield was short 2 hands after losing his best farm hand to a broken leg. The pay was fair, the work honest, and I had nowhere particular to be. So I rode south through cold rain and arrived at the Whitfield gate on a Tuesday evening with mud on my boots and not much else. Thomas Whitfield met me at the door, a big, weathered man in his late 40s, with a heavy jaw, steady gray eyes, and hands made from the same dried leather as his work gloves. He shook my hand, looked me over, read the reference letter from Laramie, and said, "You start tomorrow. Supper's at 6. Don't be late." I met his wife the next morning at the kitchen table. She set a plate of biscuits and salt pork in front of me without looking up, and I thanked her, and she said, "You're welcome," and went back to the stove. She was perhaps 34 or 35, lean and capable looking, with dark brown hair pinned up at the back of her neck, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. Not quite green, not quite gray. Something in between that changed, depending on the light. She moved through that kitchen the way a woman moves when she's been working the same space for so long that every gesture has become economy. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words, just the quiet efficiency of a life built around doing what needs to be done. Her name was Clara. The foreman, a wiry older man named Dutch, told me on my first morning out in the fields that the ranch ran about 400 head on open range with a small hay and wheat operation. Thomas Whitfield was fair, but had a temper like summer lightning. Fast, sharp, mostly forgotten by morning. "Just don't cross him on the cattle," Dutch said. "Those animals are his whole life. Everything else is secondary." I took that in and stored it. If you enjoy stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and tell us. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We'll leave a little heart just for you. Now, let's get back to Caleb and Clara. The weeks passed, the way ranch weeks do, before sunrise to long past dark. I fixed fence lines, moved cattle ahead of the frost, repaired the equipment shed roof, and split enough wood for a hard winter. Thomas watched me work and said little, which was his version of approval. Clara watched me too, though she was more careful about it. She'd refill my coffee before I'd asked, stand at the kitchen window a half-second longer than needed while I worked the yard, start a sentence at dinner, and catch herself. None of it was anything a man could point to and name. Just the particular quality of attention a woman pays to someone she's trying not to notice. I told myself it meant nothing. People got lonely out here. That was the truth of the frontier. Isolated ranches, long winters, days without a single visitor. It didn't have to mean what it looked like it might mean. I kept telling myself that for about 3 weeks. Then came the night of the early storm. Mid-October, like a blow came down from the north, faster than anyone had predicted. I was in the barn when the sky turned green and the wind picked up hard. Just enough time to get the horses settled before snow came sideways. Thomas was in town for supplies. Dutch had gone to his own quarters. I was alone with Clara in the main house. I came in stamping snow off my boots, and she was at the stove with the lamps already lit. "Thomas won't make it back tonight," she said. "The road will be closed by now." I hung my coat and said, "Yes, ma'am. I reckoned that was right." There was a silence between us that felt like it had weight. Then she said, "You hungry?" And I said yes. We ate at the kitchen table while the storm howled outside and the lamp threw long shadows across the walls. She'd made a beef stew, thick and dark and good, and we ate without much talking. But the quiet between us felt different from the usual supper quiet. It felt attentive, like we were both listening to something that wasn't quite being said yet. After supper, I helped her clear the dishes, and then sat by the fire with a cup of coffee, while she did some mending in the chair across from me. The storm was loud beyond the walls, the kind of wind that sounds like it's trying to get in. I watched the fire and thought about nothing in particular. After a while, she said, without looking up from her mending, "Where were you before this, Caleb?" I told her a little. Wyoming. Before that, Colorado. Before that, I'd spent 2 years down in New Mexico, working for a cattle outfit out of Socorro. She listened the way attentive people listen, without filling the spaces, letting the story go where it wanted. Then she said, "Did you ever want to stay somewhere?" There was something in how she asked it. Careful, almost clinical, like a doctor asking about a symptom they already suspect. "I reckon I never found a place that wanted me to stay," I said. She looked at me then, not quickly, not the way people glance. She looked at me the way you look at something you're trying to understand. "That doesn't seem right," she said quietly, "for a man like you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. After a little while, she went back to her mending, and I went back to watching the fire, and we sat there together in the storm noise until the fire burned low enough that it was time to go to bed. I didn't sleep well that night, and the days after the storm were cold and sharp and clear. I worked hard and kept to myself. I'd seen men get caught up in something that started with a lonely woman and an attentive ear and ended with a busted jaw and a very fast ride out of town. I wasn't interested. I'd come here to work, save money, and move on in spring. I held to that through October and into November, and then one gray Thursday afternoon, I came around the corner of the barn to fetch a coil of rope and found Clara Whitfield crying against the wall, and everything changed. I didn't move for a long moment. The wind was cold across the yard, and somewhere across the field, a crow called once and went silent. I looked at her wet eyes, and the flush high on her cheekbones, and the way her chin was set like she was daring me to say something cruel. And I felt something turn over in my chest like a stone rolling in a river, slow and heavy and irreversible. "Clara," I said. My voice was quieter than I'd intended. "I know," she said. "I know what I'm saying. I know what it means." She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a second and looked away, out toward the bare fields. "I've tried not to. I have tried, Caleb. For weeks I've tried." She made a small, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "It doesn't seem to be working." I put the coil of rope down in the dirt slowly, the way you set something down when you want to think clearly, and having it in your hands is a distraction. "What's happened?" I said. "What were you crying about before I came around?" She shook her head slightly, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "Thomas is selling the east pasture." She said it flat, without inflection, the way people state facts that have already finished hurting them. "The lender in Cheyenne called in the note. We don't have enough to cover it. And Thomas, he won't talk to me about it. He comes home, he eats, he sleeps, and he gets up and starts it again. He doesn't see me, Caleb." She looked back at me. "I don't think he's seen me in years." There it was. Not just desire, though that was in it. I could feel it in the air between us the way you feel weather coming before you can see it. But underneath the desire was something older and sadder and more dangerous. Loneliness. The specific loneliness of a woman who has made her life around a man who stopped noticing her, and who has had to watch that life narrow down year by year until she is standing in the cold behind a barn telling a farmhand that she wants him. "You deserve better than what you've got," I said. It was true. It wasn't what she'd asked for, but it was true. "Maybe," she said, "but better. Doesn't ride in very often out here." I picked up the rope. I didn't know what else to do with my hands. "Clara," I said carefully, "I'm not going to tell you what I feel or don't feel, because that doesn't help you any. But I need you to hear me when I say, whatever this is, it can't happen while you're married to a man who's sleeping 40 feet away." She looked at me for a long time. "That's an honorable answer," she said. "It's the only answer I've got," I said. She nodded once, smoothed her apron with both hands, and walked back toward the house. I watched her go. I stood there in the cold until I couldn't see her anymore. And then I stood there a little longer, because I needed a minute before I could trust my legs to carry me in the right direction. I told myself it was done. Said and answered. I'd handled it the right way. And that was that. I believed that for approximately 2 days. On the second night after the barn, I was in my quarters above the equipment shed, lying on my bunk, reading a 3-week-old newspaper by lamplight, when I heard a knock at the door. Light, tentative. I already knew before I opened it. She was standing in the dark with a lamp and a shawl over her shoulders, and her hair down around her face, and she looked at me with eyes that were not asking for permission anymore. "Thomas rode to Dutch's place an hour ago," she said. "He'll be there till morning. They do that sometimes. Play cards and drink." She paused. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Caleb. I couldn't stay in that house tonight." I stepped back and let her in. She sat in the one chair the room had, and I sat on the edge of the bunk, and we talked for 3 hours or more. She told me about coming west at 18, following a man she'd believed in absolutely. She told me about the early years of the marriage, hard but good. Thomas had been different then, full of plans and a particular tenderness she hadn't seen in a long time. She told me about the 2 children they'd lost, both early, and how that grief had settled into Thomas like sediment in a riverbed, changing the landscape of him in ways that couldn't be undone. I listened. That was what I could give her, that no one else out here had given her in years. At some point, she said, "Tell me something you've never told anyone." I thought about it. Then I said, "I had a homestead once, New Mexico before Socorro, 40 acres and a good spring and a woman I was going to marry." I paused. She died of fever in the second summer. I sold the land within a month and started writing. I told myself it was grief. I reckon it was. But I also reckon I just didn't want to be somewhere that reminded me of what things could have been. "I'm sorry, Caleb," she said softly. "Long time ago," I said. Grief doesn't care how long ago it was, she said. And that, right there, in that plain sentence, or in that small, exact kindness, was when I understood how much trouble I was truly in. She left before first light, slipping back across the yard in the gray pre-dawn like a shadow. I lay on my bunk and watched the ceiling and listened to the ranch wake up, a horse shifting in the barn, a bird starting somewhere out on the prairie. And I thought about a lot of things. I thought about Thomas Whitfield and the way he moved through his own house like a man moving through a fog. I thought about 40 acres and a good spring and a woman whose face I could barely recall anymore. I thought about Clara's hand resting on the arm of the chair near mine, close enough to touch, and how neither of us had reached across that distance, and how that restraint had felt like both a mercy and a slow wound. I thought, I need to leave this ranch before spring. And then I thought, I don't want to leave. Both things were true, and the truth of both of them together was a mess I didn't see a clean way through. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life on the frontier. Thomas came and went, increasingly distracted by the land sale and a bad prediction on the winter wheat. He worked brutally hard and carried his troubles alone, as if sharing the weight would diminish him. Clara moved through the house beside him like water beside rock. And in between, she and I built something that had no name and no safe place to live. Not what she'd asked for behind the barn. I had held to that, and so had she. But something. A look across the supper table that lasted half a second too long, when conversations in the kitchen while Dutch and Thomas were out, standing closer than we needed to. On 2 more nights when Thomas was elsewhere, she came to the equipment shed, and we talked until almost morning. And those hours were the most alive I'd felt in longer than I could clearly remember. It broke on a night in early December, when the temperature dropped to something that made the wood of the buildings crack and pop in the cold like pistol shots. I was in the barn checking on the horses when I heard raised voices from the main house. I wasn't trying to listen. Sound carries differently in the cold, cuts through walls, moves across open ground like something alive. I couldn't make out the words, just the shape of anger and the shape of something being refused, and then the particular silence that falls after a door is shut hard. My Clara came to the barn 20 minutes later. She wasn't crying. She looked past crying, past the point where tears offered any kind of relief. Her face was white and set, and she had a lamp and a heavy coat and nothing else. "He wants me to sign over my portion of the deed," she said, "to release my claim to the property so he can restructure the debt without my name on the papers." She said it very quietly. "He says it's just practical, a formality." She looked at me. "It's not a formality, Caleb." "No," I said, "it's not." She sat down on a hay bale with the lamp beside her, and for a minute she just looked at the floor. "If I sign that," she said, "I've got nothing. If he decides to go, if this all falls apart, I've got no claim on anything I've spent 12 years building." She looked up at me. "He knows that. He's asking me anyway." I crouched down so I was at her level. "Clara," I said. "Don't tell me it's his right," she said very quickly. "I know the law. I know what it says about wives and husbands and property. I need someone to say out loud that it isn't right." "It isn't right," I said. She let out a breath. "Thank you." We stayed in the barn a long time that night. The horses were quiet around us, steam rising from their nostrils in the cold. The lamp threw a warm, close circle of light in all that cold dark. And inside that circle, it was almost possible to pretend the world outside didn't exist. At some point, Clara said, "What would you do? If you were me?" I thought about it carefully. Then I said, "I wouldn't sign it. He'll be furious. Yes. He might ask me to leave. He might. She was quiet for a moment. Where would I go? I didn't have a good answer to that. The frontier was hard on women alone. That was just the plain truth. The world wasn't set up for it, and the courage required to navigate it without a man's name attached to you was the kind of courage that didn't get celebrated in songs or stories. I knew women who had done it. I respected every one of them more than I could easily say. "You're stronger than you think," I said. She looked at me. Her eyes in the lamplight were that in-between color again, the creek water green-gray that changed with the light. "You believe that," she said. It wasn't a question. "I do," I said. "Why?" "Because of how you've handled everything I've watched you handle since September," I said. "So a woman who wasn't strong wouldn't still be standing." Something shifted in her expression. Something opened that had been held closed for a long time. She reached out and put her hand over mine where it rested on the hay bale. Just that. Her hand over mine. We both looked at it for a moment, this quiet, simple thing. Then she said, "I asked you to be my lover, Caleb. Behind this barn 3 weeks ago." "I remember," I said. I meant it. Well, we sat like that in the lamplight, while the cold pressed against the walls, and I thought about things I hadn't let myself think about in a long time. About staying somewhere, about what it might mean to stop moving, about whether a man who'd been a drifter for a decade could learn to be something else. I didn't have answers, but I'd stopped believing answers were something you found before you moved. Sometimes you moved first, and the answers came along behind you, slowly, like riders catching up on a long trail. If you've made it this far, we're grateful for every minute you've spent with us. Before we reach the end of this story, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments. What city are you watching from? We'll drop a little heart on every single answer. Now, let's see how this ends for Caleb and Clara. I know Clara did not sign the deed. She told Thomas the following morning at breakfast in the same quiet and exact tone she used for everything important. No drama, no argument, just a clear statement of where she stood and why. Thomas pushed back hard. His temper came up fast, the way Dutch had warned me it would. But Clara held her ground with the kind of steadiness that comes from having decided something all the way through, not just on the surface, but in the deep places where a decision has to actually live. I wasn't at the table for any of it. I heard it from Dutch, who'd been near enough to catch the shape of things. He told me with a careful look, not committing to an interpretation. That was Dutch's way of giving information without inserting himself into it. She held firm, he said. He didn't like it. No, I said. He wouldn't. He worked a piece of tack that didn't need working. That woman's got a harder road than she probably knows, he said, not looking at me. Reckon a good man might want to be thinking about that. I looked at the side of his face. Reckon so, I said. He nodded once, and that was all. Thomas Whitfield changed after that morning. Not explosively. He went cold instead. He stopped speaking to Clara beyond the necessary, moved through the house like she was furniture he'd rearranged in his mind. It was the particular cruelty of men who don't know another way to handle being told no by someone they think belongs to them. I watched it and felt a slow anger building that I kept carefully banked. The week before Christmas, something happened that resolved nothing and changed everything. And I was saddling my horse in the early morning to ride out and check the cattle at the far end of the south pasture. A solo job, a long day, the kind that clears the head. Clara came to the barn before I rode out in her work dress and heavy coat, hair already up, and handed me a cloth-wrapped package. Cornbread, dried beef, 2 hard-boiled eggs. "It's a long ride," she said. "Thank you, ma'am," I said. She looked at me. Caleb. Just my name. A whole conversation inside it. "I know," I said. "Do you?" she said quietly. "Yes," I said. I know what I want. I know what I've got no right to want yet. And I know that when the time is what it needs to be, I won't ride away from it. I held her gaze. You have my word. She nodded, slowly, with the dignity of a woman who has learned not to need too much from a single moment, but who allows herself, just this once, to take what's been offered. Ride careful, she said. Always, I said. I mounted up and rode out into the cold, white morning, and the ranch fell away behind me, and the prairie opened up ahead, enormous and silent and indifferent the way it always was, the sky above it every shade of blue from pale to deep. I rode for a long time without thinking about much, just the horse beneath me, and the frozen and a knowledge of where I was headed, and a willingness to wait for the road to clear. A drifter learns a few things. If he drifts long enough, he learns that the land doesn't care what you've done or where you've come from. He learns that the cold is just cold, and the heat is just heat, and the loneliness is just loneliness, and none of those things are personal. He learns that most of what he was running from was never behind him to begin with. It was always inside him, patient, waiting for a quiet enough moment to surface. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, he learns that the place he stopped is the place he was always going to stop. That all those miles, and all those ranches, and all those early mornings saddling up and riding on were just the long way around to the thing that was waiting for him. That the road was never really the destination. That the destination was someone standing in a barn door, handing him cornbread, and looking at him like he was something worth staying for. I came back to the Whitfield Ranch that evening, with the cattle accounted for, and the south fence in reasonable shape. Clara was at the kitchen window when I rode in. She didn't wave. She just looked at me through the glass for a moment, steady and clear, the lamplight behind her making her a warm shadow against the dark. I put up my horse and walked across the yard. A drifter learns a few things if he drifts long enough. He learns the land doesn't care what he's done or where he's come from. He learns that most of what he was running from was never behind him. It was always inside him, patient, waiting for a quiet enough moment to surface. And sometimes, not often, he learns that the place he stopped was always the place he was going to stop. That all those miles and ranches and early mornings riding on were just the long way around to the thing waiting for him. That the road was never the destination. The destination was someone standing in a barn door, handing him cornbread, looking at him like he was something worth staying for. I stood in the cold yard and looked up at the winter stars, extravagant, uncountable, indifferent to everything below them, and beautiful for exactly that reason. Then I went inside. Some stories don't end clean. Some end with a man walking through a door in the dark, knowing something has changed in him that isn't changing back, at the threshold, on the edge of something real, cold at his back and warmth ahead, and a woman inside who said what she needed to say, and who deserves someone who will stay. I had been a drifter for a long time, but on that December night in the Wyoming Territory, I reckoned I was just about done with drifting. Some things are worth staying for. She was one of them.